like and subscribe. Now, which one of history's "good guys" was actually a horrible person? Alexander Graham Bell pushed for the eugenics of deaf and hard of hearing people, and was a major obstacle to fund schools for the deaf, which thankfully did persist despite the say hat. Also, Helen Keller was a super eugenicist, not joking either. If only she could see the error of her ways, she would have heard the voices of suffering from such views. So I learned recently that Coco Channel of Channel No. 5 was very anti-Semitic and eventually became a Nazi spy. On the flip side of Finer Sense, Christian Dior created a perfume after his sister, who was a member of the French Resistance. Rudyard Kipling, author of The Jungle Book, paraphrasing, "The only way to keep the yellow man out is to bring the white man in," also got his son killed by using his influence to get him into the army despite his son's piss poor eyesight. Bit of a dick move, if you ask me. Not necessarily a good guy, but got lots of positive attention from the release of The Greatest Showman. Apparently P.T. Barnum was a terrible person in real life. The Greatest Showman is a film P.T. Barnum would release about himself. I remember someone on r/fixingmovies said the perfect way to end the film would have been to have P.T. Barnum look directly at the camera, saying that's how it really happened, wink, and then cut to credits. Imagine looking like this and casting Hugh Jackman to play you. I think I heard that was what the makers were going for. He got his start at age 25 when he purchased the right to rent an aged black woman by the name of Joyce Heth. Joyce Heth was also paralyzed except for one arm, and he worked her to death and did her autopsy in front of people in the street and then said it wasn't her. Amazing entrepreneur, yes. Hilarious scam artist, also yes. Evil moth earther, abso-effing-lutely. Considering he's usually attributed the phrase "there's a sucker born every minute," I can kinda see that. I realized during the movie that the real guy must have been a terrible a-hole. My girlfriend and her family wouldn't buy it. I'll never forget how my then father-in-law told us that the character of Barnum should be an example for us in life. Alfred Hitchcock was an a-hole/sexual predator. Tippi Hedren wrote about it in her memoir. She did say he was a brilliant film marker, so you can be both. Luckily, no other famous directors were sexual predators. I've been roaming around this thread looking for this reference. Yeah, Hitchcock is so effed up. He was famous for pulling pranks like chaining a dude up over a long night and giving him a bottle of whiskey laced with serious laxatives, so he shat himself painfully in chains for 12 hours or so. He made the actress from Psycho, Janet Leigh, stand in the shower for almost a week. She only takes baths now. The degree to which he abused Tippi Hedren during that scene from The Birds is, wow. He literally threw birds at her for 5 days, 8 hours a day, so that they were pissed off and actually attacked her. Even after her doctor told him she couldn't take any more, she still has scars, not to mention the sexual assaults and the threats to ruin her career if she didn't comply. He sent her daughter, Melanie Griffith, a really lifelike doll of her mother, dead in a coffin. She was 8. Jude was F edition. Behind the Bastards does a great couple episodes about him. Those are just the ones I remember off the top of my head from 2+ hours of it. He did send her daughter what now? No wonder his most famous work was named Psycho for FS sake. While he almost certainly wasn't the first to say it, Lord Acton once observed that great men are almost always bad men. Pluck any great man from history, those rare figures about whom the story of the human race seems to turn, and you find a monster who changed the world, probably without even intending to do so. It's my estimation that every man ever got a statue made of him was one kind of a son of a bee or another Malcolm Reynolds. Yep, I hate reading about my heroes, because really quickly, they lose their hero status. Jebediah Springfield, or his real less commonly known name, Hans Sprungfield, the murderous pirate. He had a silver tongue. You're banned from this thread, you and your children, and your children's children, for 3 months. Lightning McQueen. The scene when he yells at Mater for embarrassing him in front of everyone by leaking oil. Total douche. Henry Ford was so anti-Semitic that Hitler considered him a hero. Brave New World makes a whole lot more sense now. How? I haven't read the book. I was reading your post and thought it would end with that Hitler thought he should chill. Tinkerbell. Everybody thinks she was so cute and such a good friend to Peter, but she was a jealous psychopath and tried to murder Wendy several times. I mean, In the book she only did it once, because that makes attempted murder better. You really have to wonder what happened to Tinkerbell between the new CG movies and Peter Pan. What do you mean? Well, you've seen the newer Tinkerbell movies. She has a little bit of a temper, but otherwise she's a pretty sweet-hearted fairy, and she lives with all of the other fairies. Then, in Peter Pan, she's the only fairy you see, and she's more interested in being with Peter. Not only that, but she tries on more than one occasion to murder Wendy, and when called out on it, she shows no remorse. Ice cold. Clearly something horrific went down in Pixie Hollow, and Tink is either the cause, or just the sole survivor. Good lord. So Peter Pan is actually a grim post-apocalyptic tale. Yes. This thread reads like the oatmeal's greatest hits. Ned Kelly is neat, because he seems to have recognized his anti-hero status. His actions were never morally right, but it's hard to say we haven't ever wanted to do the same. IDK, I feel like a lot of Ned Kelly's actions were justified. If you take his accounts as opposed to the policemen he dealt with, the truth is likely somewhere in between. There's no excuse for his early theft, but those wouldn't make him a horrible person by today's standards. He was a criminal turned outlaw turned national hero / revolutionary. Sure, he stole and murdered, but he was a product of his upbringing and the state of Australia at the time. Since most have been covered, I'll do a guy who was a true fine villain who turned into kind of a decent guy. It doesn't nearly wipe the slate clean, but it's an interesting historical transformation. Nathan Bedford Forrest, slave trader, Confederate general, likely war criminal, first Grand Wizard of the Klan. In later years, Forrest expressed regret at his life's work. He began publicly advocating for former slaves to receive better treatment, including their ability to enter into higher education. He attempted to act upon his shame by petitioning President Grant to allow him to put down the KKK by force. At least he made the attempt to redeem himself. If we cannot change as a person after our mistakes, however diabolical, then what is the point? Might as well just go murdering. *Margaret Mead said that the first sign of civilization is the splint. Animals break legs and die, left to fend for themselves. Humans break legs and are cared for by other humans until they get better. Legs can be broken for lots of different reasons, but the aftercare, the investment into others that may or may not ever be recouped, that is a primordial sign of human civilization. Forgiveness is a splint for the human soul. It does not always pay off, and it can't undo what was done, but without it our souls can never develop a spiritual civilization. In this thread, a lot of people who were never considered good guys. Unpopular opinion. Dog lover and painter Adolf Hitler did some pretty questionable stuff in the 30s. Really changed his ways in the 40s though. Even killed a genocidal dictator. Astronomer here, this is a hard one to admit, because I definitely loved his book and idolized his antics a bit when I was a young physics major. But Richard Feynman. A lot of people read Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, and share my reaction. And his physics lectures are amazing. But the older I get, and the more people I meet who knew him, holy sh, the guy was beyond just. Times were different levels of misogyny against women. He committed domestic violence against his wife, kept lying to undergrads when he was in Cornell that he wasn't a professor so he could sleep with him, and rumor has it, had to leave Cornell for Caltech because he slept with other faculty members' wives. And I've definitely heard a ton about him trying to pick up other scientists at physics conferences. To know he was considered a creep. To be clear, I think someone can do good science and be an awful person, but that's not what Op was asking. Also, anyone who has been around a physics department knows that casual sexist jokes and the like are still not that uncommon today, and the fact that physics keeps idolizing Feynman probably doesn't help in changing the culture. Feynman was renowned for sitting in strip clubs and drawing nudes of the dancers in his off time. I've been reading an autobiography of Dyson Freeman, who spent time with RF, traveled and road trips. Richard was a womanizer after his wife died. He had a reputation as a doting husband during his marriage and during his wife's illness. After her death, though, genius, intellect and carouser. There's a statue of Oliver Cromwell in London, loads of movies about him and how he was a brave revolutionary. Nah, F that. He was an evil sociopath who committed genocide on Irish Catholics and turned the UK into a Puritan dictatorship. See banned Christmas and dancing. Miserable prick. As someone who lives in England, I had no idea people actually see him favorably, coming from an English/Irish background. I grew up hearing how much of a bastard he was, especially with regards to his treatment of the Irish. I'm amazed statues stand. I thought he has been hated by the general populace pretty consistently since he took power. After the monarchy restoration, the people hated him so much that they dug his corpse back up to posthumously execute him. Who decided it was a good idea to erect statues of him? I've always thought that his statues are there as a warning to our monarchs to make sure they don't get any funny ideas about the divine right of kings again. Steve Jobs was a bit of an a bit. You should read Small Fry. Steve Jobs was a tremendous a-hole. Didn't he die because he refused treatment to cancer? He had pancreatic cancer and refused to listen to his doctors for treatment. He thought he was so much smarter, and he somehow came to the conclusion that an all-fruit diet would cure him. This was possibly the worst diet you can put your pancreas through, and it led to his death. Fun fact, when Ashton Kutcher was getting ready for his role as Jobs in that movie, he ate an all-fruit diet, but had to stop when he was admitted to the hospital because his pancreas started to shut down. Bid was an understatement. The guy was a massive credit hog, abused his employees, and normalized a lot of business practices that are now used by several other companies. Bob Marley, and there's a very good story to back this up that also explains how he grew to be #1 reggae singer of Jamaica. He had a posse of friends that would intimidate radio networks of Jamaica into playing his music, as well as destroying the alpha discs of other newer artists. IDKWTF they're called, but the copy the radio networks were given in order to play on the air. He might have been trying to promote feel-good music and peace and all that, but he was a thug when it came to getting that music out, and at the same time, gave a Jude songwriting credit so that he'd get royalties from the music and be able to keep his soup kitchen open. People are so weird. Bully one guy, help another. Ari his wife, help a guy keep his soup kitchen open. F. Goes to show how complicated people are. Idolize ideals, not people. This is how cults of personality get so gnarly. People refuse to acknowledge traits/actions inconsistent with their image of the person. Eventually they just cling on to a fictional image, so they don't have to reevaluate their beliefs. Was also alleged to be monstrously terrible to his wife, according to her. A shorter list would be which of history's good guys were truly good guys, and not later found out to be complete $HOLES. Curly from the Three Stooges, typically having several dogs at any given time. Curly was known to come home often with strays he found along his travels. He would foster the strays until he was able to find new homes, and when the Stooges were on tour, Curly made it a point to rehome at least one stray in each town they visited. It is estimated that Curly saved and rehomed more than 5,000 dogs in his lifetime, making him a man before his time with his humane concern for man's best friend. This makes me so happy. I love it so much. Thank you. Which of history's bad guys were actually good guys would be an interesting one. Mr. Rogers. The dude used to fart loudly to make his wife laugh. I mean, not only is that love, but it's one of the purest forms of humor. Babies laugh at farts. Bob Ross. The battered, bruised, and beaten paintbrushes he left in his wake may disagree with you. Charlie Chaplin. He got married to a 15-year-old girl because he got her pregnant when she was 14. He was openly pedophile and, from what I've read, quite an a-hole. Apparently, he and Marlon Brando worked together later on, and Charlie was such an uptight a-hole that Marlon Brando, of all people, had to tell him to chill the hell out. Brando, for what it's worth, is infamous for demanding ridiculous concessions from directors for his performances, refusing to learn his lines, and a number of other things. This is a little more niche, but Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, the guy did great things and created a program of recovery that has saved millions of lives since its inception 85 years ago. He was also an arrogant a-hole that cheated on his wife even in sobriety. Nothing is black and white, it seems. Zebras would like a word. Alexander Graham Bell. This man did not invent the telephone. Several people were working on similar technology at the same time, Antonio Meucci invented it first, but there was a court case over who got the patent rights. Meucci died before the case was settled, and Graham Bell won the glory he didn't deserve. Tony Soprano knew this and went ape over it at the dinner table. Antonio Meucci invented the telephone, and he got robbed. Bell was also a eugenicist who sought to end sign language in schools and wanted to ban deaf people from marrying each other. He was a staunch oralist, and the repercussions of his actions are still being felt in society today through such audist institutions like the Bell Institute. We learned quite a lot about old Alexander Graham Bell in ASL class. You never, unfortunately, learn how much of a C he was in elementary school. In some aspects to the 60s and 70s, when the Beatles were icons. I'm talking about John Lennon. People who use his image and face for peace sometimes forget important details. He abused women. He was a cheater. He abused his children. Made one go completely deaf in one ear. Total hypocrite on the no possessions when he lived one of the most lavish lifestyles of his time. Compulsive liar. Had a sexual appetite for his own mother. Almost killed a few people. Look up Bob Wooler. He was almost punched to death by John. There were others, but their stories have either been disputed or unclaimed. So whenever I see a bunch of people sing Imagine, I just shake my head in shame. Cause so many people don't even know how bad he was, but act like he was a saint. As a massive Beatles fanatic, when I come across people who say that John is this symbol of peace, I always remind them of this. You cannot be a true fan of something solo and not criticize it, and all of the other Beatles would come before John in this regard. IDK man. When I read about Martin Luther last year, I thought he was kinda cool as he created the Protestant branch of Christianity, but I recently read about what he thought of Jews, and yikes. For those of you who don't know, he got pissed when the Jews didn't want to convert to his religion and started being anti-Semitic as F. He wrote a whole book on Jews and their lies and said that he urged others to burn down synagogues to prove their loyalty to Christianity. He also wanted the Jewish prayer books to be taken away from them. I misread and thought it said Martin Luther King Jr., and I was shocked. Mayo. So glad you said this. I thought the same thing. America's dad, Bill Cosby. We've been watching 30 Rock in our house lately, and in a recent episode that predated the Cosby revelations by a few years, Tracy Morgan makes a joke about Cosby being a terrible person for assaulting his aunt. That was pretty crazy to hear in context today. 30 Rock has a whole lot of Cosby references, and they are almost all negative. As the other guy said, Hannibal Buress knew. Fun fact, Hannibal Buress was a writer on 30 Rock, and would go on to blow up this whole Cosby thing years later by making a joke about it in his stand-up. Who was the mom? Sleeping Beauty. Depends on what you mean. Point judging by today's standards, I'd say most historical good guys were horrible people. Judging by the standards of their era, point things become more complicated. Yeah, even abolitionists back in the day may have been against slavery, but that didn't mean they thought blacks should be treated equally. Shout out to John Brown. And those abolitionists who did think that people of color should be equal to white folks were effectively shut up by their peers. It was thought that, if they asked for equality, the slaves would never be free. It's an interesting thing to think about, but I get upset when people try to pass it off as if there weren't people and groups fighting for equality in that era. There definitely were, but the other abolitionists suppressed their voices as to deal with the larger problem, rather than the underlying problem. I still don't know what was right in that situation, and maybe that's okay, but the situation is a little more complicated than just abolitionists thought that blacks shouldn't be equal. Harold Holt. He forgot my birthday. I forgot his last location. Sir John A. Macdonald, first Prime Minister of Canada, did a lot for the country in its infancy, but treated indigenous people like garbage. John Lennon. He is basically portrayed as this selfless angel of the hippie movement, but the more you look into his life, his actions, and how he treated other people close to him, you will quickly realize he is what some people would call a terrible human being. Joseph P. Kennedy, dad of John, Bobby, and Teddy, had one of his daughters lobotomized. She was likely autistic, but was considered an embarrassment to the family. Rosemary Kennedy was never considered autistic. When her mother, Rose Kennedy, was giving birth to Rosemary, the doctor wasn't available, and Rose was told to keep her legs closed until the doctor arrived. Baby Rosemary was in the birth canal for about 2 hours, being deprived of oxygen the whole time. which resulted in severe learning disabilities. What? And I cannot stress this enough. The F. Who considers Joe Kennedy a good guy? Yes, he was a horrible person. I think he was the true curse of the Kennedy family. Besides poor Rosemary, he disowned his eldest daughter for who she was marrying. He was anti-Semitic. He was a womanizer who cheated on his wife numerous times. And he was a power-hungry arrogant A. Most Australians think Captain Cook was a pretty good dude. I think the Aboriginals would say otherwise. Napoleon. I'm French and I don't get why people like him so freaking much here. He re-established slavery and tried to conquer a huge part of Europe, leaving literal bloodbaths behind him. Gosh, even the painting of his coronation reeks of narcissism. He's putting the crown on his own head for F***ck sake. Ellen. You can see it in her TV persona. Basically, all those little offhanded put-downs she does that pass for jokes are the real Ellen. She doesn't seem to be trying to make them funny either. People just take it that way because it is Ellen. She is the kind of person that is always talking shit about everybody else. And if she gets called out of it, it was just a joke. But you know it really wasn't. Apparently she's not nice at all. Plenty of mistreated staff have a story to tell. I always thought she was a little fishy. Teddy Roosevelt. Interesting quote of his. I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indians are the dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are. So he was only 90% racist. Yay. Thomas Edison. Biggest monopolist ever, and took credit for other people's work. He didn't invent the light bulb, but bought the rights and advanced it. He monopolized the film projector most films at the time, and it took a very long lawsuit to get that fixed. He took many creations from his employees and put his name on it. This wasn't illegal because of the contracts employees signed at the time, but it's not exactly a sign of goodwill. I don't hate the guy, but his character is often completely exaggerated. This wasn't illegal because of the contracts employees signed at the time, but it's not exactly a sign of goodwill. This still happens today in some scientific fields like chemistry. Discover a new element while still a lab assistant. Yeah, you better believe that your superior will name it and write at least one book about how he found it. When you work as a software engineer for Google, they make you sign a contract saying all code you write while they employ you, they own. Even if you wrote a script to automate your coffee maker over the weekend, they still own it. Thomas Edison and Henry Ford's winter homes are in my city. As soon as students are in 3rd grade, all the schools would bring us to their homes and really try to make you believe both of them were good people. Oh, Ford is by far 100 times worse than Edison. Edison was a thief. Ford was a literal Nazi sympathizer, even received one of Nazi Germany's highest civilian awards, and was responsible for writing The International Jew, a major anti-Semitic work that Hitler himself admired. You'd be horrified at how many of our idolized businessmen from the 20s and 30s were super anti-Semitic, and some of them were full-on fascist. Elvis Presley. He never wrote a song in his life, but his record label made any songwriters hand over half of their writing fees before Elvis would record their songs. He's credited as a co-writer on the majority of his songs. That's why Dolly Parton refused to let him record I Will Always Love You. She wouldn't sign away any of the songwriting credit or future profits from her work. She's a savvy businesswoman. Seriously, the more I read about her, the more I've come to respect her. Dolly Parton is one of our underappreciated historical good guys. He also began his relationship with Priscilla when she was 14 years old. He was 10 years older. The amount of musical heroes who were also outright pedophiles is incredible. Any musician known for their groupies was likely sleeping with teenagers. And no, I don't mean 18+ teens. Most people who are good are just powerless. Most people are complicated, and if they are in a position where they can get away with it, will do both good and bad things. Most of them. I don't know about other countries, but in America schools tend to put historical figures on high pedestals. It would be better to be upfront about how people do good things and terrible things. Charlemagne. He slaughtered a ridiculous amount of Saxon people for not converting to Christianity. He is also known for destroying pagan shrines and groves, when in reality he was just showing up to unguarded holy places, taking all the trinkets and offerings people had left, and then burned them down.